just look at the piece as the piece. And so, you know, we did a play by Sarah Kane, not about Sarah Kane. And that was really important. I don't know now, I can't speak to audiences, but just in the actual doing of it, it was really, really important for me.
And what would you say to someone who said that this play seems like a suicide note?
Well, I'd say that you're probably on the right track because the main character kills herself at the end. But whether it's Sarah Kane's suicide note or not is not my, do you know what I mean? Like, it is in that respect, it's a beautiful suicide note of the main character who kills herself. But calling it Sarah Kane's suicide note, I think, detracts from the exquisiteness of the writing. And somebody who was actually suffering through what Sarah Kane was suffering, to actually be able to write like this while she was suffering through it is, you know, a remarkable feat on its own. And so that's what I hope people would concentrate on, the fact that she actually wrote this beautiful play. You know.
No, I think that's something that it's not always. We romanticize depression, but depression is almost an absence of creativity. So this field, that's what ultimately, because I've gone back and forth about what we're getting like this. And in the end, I feel that it could only be a result of the part of her that was not depressed in a way, or that it was her fight against it rather than succumbing to it.
Yeah, which is why it's a life letter in writing, right? It's the fight against it. It's the fight against the illness. It's not the illness.
For the other two of you, did the facts, the biography of Sarah Kane's life affect how you approached your work at all?
For me, it did, because although I agree with Vikki, you know, the work is exquisite, and so, you know, she was not necessarily writing it as a thing, but as a piece of work. Yet it's so entangled because of that element we were talking about earlier of the presence of the function of the works is so there that I couldn't really pretend to ignore it. I mean, it was, and Crave is not really a suicide note, right? Like, if anything, it feels like the loss of someone else, or maybe the loss of a part of her, or something along those lines. But it's still, to me, it was part of the package that was just in the room.
I often wondered if she wanted me to think of her work in relationship to her suicide. I often wondered, like, you're a successful writer, you know you're going to be legendary, you know you kind of are legendary, and you're going to kill yourself. You write this final play that is this suicide note, really. I think. I mean, I agree. There's the process that you go as an artist inside of it, and then there's the kind of the thing, and then you fucking do it. So I wonder, there's a message there. There's God that's she knew that my plays will forever be will be branded with this final moment of mine. And so I wondered, what does she want me to know? You know, what did she think? What would become blasted now that she had done this? You know.
Well, I think that's very interesting because it brings up this idea that I was thinking about this evening, that she created an ongoing relationship between the interpreters of her work and herself in that way, and I think also in the way of writing text like Crave or 448, those two in particular, that can be interpreted, that have to be interpreted so specifically from the outside, or else they cannot be done. So I feel it's like her hand. You know, you have to grab her hand. You can't not bring as much to it in a way that you can't sit back and interpret it. You can't sit back and let it roll on the stage, right? It won't roll, right? You have to meet that hand and grab it. So to me, that idea of her knowledge of her suicide and how it would affect it's part of that relationship to me.
I think it's a big part of it.
Yeah.
I think in the way Sylvia Plath as well, and just, artists, I think, Sylvia Plath obviously had a kind of love affair with death, and the subject of her writing was that love affair, and then her final meeting with it was an aspect of her writing, and we don't talk about these things. We don't often talk about things this way because I think as a society we really need to pathologize suicide and kind of like, well, that's not the real, that was the sickness talking. And I think that, I don't know if necessarily Sarah Kane was operating in this thing, in that sort of dichotomy. I think that the writing, the suicide, was all part of an existence, an expression, and a coping with life. So I don't know if there's value in even saying, well, it's separate from her suicide. I don't know whether it illuminates the work, or I don't think her suicide either taints her work or tarnishes her work. It's just what it was.
Yeah, it's work. I mean, because there will be lots of people that come to the work that won't know anything about her. So it's just work to her. It's just but
there's the marketing aspect of the suicide. There's the sexiness of the suicide,
Yeah.
and that's a whole other thing. There's a kind of mediatization. And there's a great book called The Savage God by Al Alvarez, who was a literary critic and a close friend of Sylvia Plath, who actually found Sylvia Plath dead. And he wrote this sort of meditation on suicide in literature, and then also his own personal experience with his suicidal thoughts and Sylvia Plath. And he talks a lot about sort of the ramifications that happen culturally when a cultural figure kills themselves. And that's interesting. And that, in a way, you kind of have to tease away the kind of rock star sexiness of the suicide and kind of actually treat it as a real thing. That sometimes is the teasing apart that I had to do with plastic, which, this is someone who tried to kill herself, got saved, and then did it again in the hospital, like she was going to do it, and with shoelaces.
Think of.
Just thinking, actually,
Should we
might have the time
that's
to,
a good idea.
if anybody from the house has questions.